playing to your potential comes from a few things. The first thing is you've got to have conviction. Conviction in what you're doing. And you have to be a consummate learner. So it's conviction about what you want to do, and the consummate learning has to do with who you are.
Hello and welcome to the 16th conversation at the Play to Potential podcast series. I'm Deepak Jayaraman, the creator and curator of this series of conversations. I'm an executive coach and do work in the space of leadership development, but with a sharp focus on leadership transitions, both in the context of companies and careers. You could visit transitioninsight.com for details. My objective from this podcast is to have learning conversations with a range of people and share those curated insights with you. This time, I'm excited to be talking to Vinita Bali. Vinita has had a distinguished career spanning 5 different continents in organizations like Coca Company, Cadbury's, and Britannia. Today, she is the chairman of the board of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition and is a board member on several Indian and international boards. We spoke about a range of topics, ranging across her decision to enter consumer goods after initially enrolling for a PhD, her perspectives around navigating a career in a large MNC, transitioning back to India at a leadership level, effectiveness in boards, and much, much more. Without further ado, over to the conversation. Vinita, thanks so much for your time. Excited to be talking to you.
It's great to be talking to you as well, Deepak.
Lovely. And maybe to start with the current, Vinita, you do a bunch of different things. I'd love to get a sense of what all do you do today, and more importantly, why do you do what you do? Talk to us a little bit about your portfolio.
So, Deepak, this is something that I had thought about, having done almost 37, 38 years of an operational role, right. Where you're kind of on high alert all the time. And it's great. It gave me all the fodder and all the experience and the adrenaline, all of which I enjoyed and I would do all over again. Mm-hmm. I think there also comes a time where you want to move on and do something different. And as I thought about it in my professional life, that something different came in the form of opportunities to go and work in different countries. So even though I've had long stints with largely 3 companies, I have moved around a lot, right. Not just cities, but countries and continents. And, that was both a challenge as well as a very rewarding experience, because what I learned was not just about business, but a whole lot of other things, which was really very interesting for me. So I had thought about this. I had got involved with, activities or domains outside typically of the corporate world. Mm-hmm. So my interest in nutrition actually came from some work that we had done in the area of nutrition when I was at Britannia. Right. So I was very clear that, whilst I was still energetic and productive, I want to spend the next 20 years of my life doing things very different from what I've done, let's say, in the last 35 years of my life. And, that created the shift. So my portfolio is still... I still spend, I would say, 50 to 60% of my time on corporate and corporate-related stuff through boards, advisories, and such activities, mm-hmm. both in India as well as globally, mm-hmm. because I really love the global perspective. And I would say about 30 to 35% of my time is on nutrition and nutrition-related domains, right. which also has interaction with industry. Right. The balance 5 to 10% is doing a bunch of different things, actually, partly academic. Mm-hmm. I am on the board of governors of IIM Bangalore. Right. And I also, interestingly, I'm president of the Welham Girls' School. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because I knew very little about primary school education. Mm-hmm. And you realize that if things are to change, then unless we start looking at primary school education, we're not going to be able to change it at the secondary or the tertiary or the advanced level. So for me, this is a beautiful time because I am learning, I am being challenged. Boards I've taken have nothing to do with domains that I have worked in, because for me, boards is a great opportunity to learn and develop as much as you contribute. So I'm actually having a great time.
Lovely. And I'm very, it's interesting to see you use 20 years as a chunk of time. I've seen people say 5 years, 10 years, but is there a deeper insight behind that?
No, I mean, I'm hoping that my health will continue, my energy will continue.
That's not where I was going, but...
so as long as, that happens.
Sure.
When I say 20 years, I'm saying for a long time to come.
Sure.
And, I'm one of those people where if I feel that, been there, done that, staying more in this area,
sure,
I'm not going to learn anything or enjoy myself, I'll go and find something different to do. There's just too much that you can, learn and experience in one lifetime.
And would you have done this, since you're having so much fun, would you have timed this a little earlier with the wisdom of hindsight?
I maybe about a year or 2 years earlier than I did.
Okay.
I also want to emphasize that I think what I learned through my various journeys,
sure,
through geographies, companies, hierarchies, I think all of that is very important. You need a strong foundation to be able to do a bunch of different things. At least that's been my experience.
Got it. And let's talk about GAIN, Vinita. You spent a lot of time with them, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
To talk to us a little bit about the work they do, your role, and how that came about.
Yeah, so let me start with GAIN. So GAIN was created in 2001 through a special resolution of the UN. And that is the time that the Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization, and GAIN, which is the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, were created. And I think the insight in both of these sort of creations really was that if the world had to tackle multifaceted issues like nutrition, it needed coalitions which were more than just unidimensional. So what I mean by that is nutrition is a function not just of the food we eat, which again is divided into your macronutrients and micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals, but it is also impacted by health and sanitation and hygiene, availability of potable water, access to primary health care, and things like that. And therefore, it is a multifaceted problem that requires a multidimensionality of solving it. And the initial funding really came from, foundations like the Gates Foundation, etc. So today, GAIN has been in existence for 15 years. In fact, in December of this year, we're going to be celebrating 15 years of GAIN. Wow. And over these years has worked in understanding and sharpening areas within nutrition. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one easy to understand and simple intervention in nutrition is fortifying staples with nutrients. A great example of that is iodine with salt in India. If you go overseas, you will see, milk is invariably fortified with vitamin A and D. Countries like the US, Latin America, etc., decided to fortify sometime in the 30s and the 40s. And you therefore see a different dimensionality of, deficiencies there compared with India. India, we're in a fairly grave situation where, still 42% of children under the age of 5 are malnourished or undernourished, stunted or wasted. And we typically tend to say, oh, he or she is short because, in India, we don't grow very tall. But actually, it's wasting and stunting. So that is kind of the background to GAIN, and GAIN works in over 30 countries right now. Mm-hmm. And the word alliance in GAIN is very, very important. It's perhaps one of the very few, if not the only organizations that can talk to industry, development partners, NGOs, private sector, to come together to find solutions to the problems of undernutrition and malnutrition. To make it very palpable, in India, GAIN has been involved in work that has happened in Rajasthan on fortification of edible oil with vitamin A and D. And the state government of Rajasthan has actually now stipulated that all oil sold in Rajasthan will have to be fortified with vitamins A and D. So GAIN works there, not just talking about the efficacy of vitamin A and D in edible oil, because that has been proven over and over again in many studies that have been done around the world, but also how it would actually be implemented. You know, where do the micronutrients come from? Where does this thing happen, etc. So looking at the entire marketplace, looking at the entire value chain. In Nigeria, GAIN is working on how do we address post-harvest loss for something like tomatoes, which are a great source of vitamin A, and yet you have many kids in Nigeria with poor eyesight and night blindness, which is caused by a shortage of vitamin A. GAIN has worked in Afghanistan, for example, on producing calorie-dense and nutrition-dense products to get to people or to children. In India, actually, my first interaction with GAIN was when I was with Britannia. And we worked, it's a long story, but I'll just shorten it. We worked with GAIN. So when I joined Britannia, I realized that Britannia was making products for the World Food Programme, which are calorie dense and nutrition dense. And I asked myself the question, if we are doing this for the world, why aren't we doing it for India, where we've got such a poor nutritional status? GAIN was opening an office in India. I met them, and that conversation led to a wonderful collaboration where I think in 2007 or early 2008, we collaborated. It was a wonderful example of public-private partnership where the Nandi Foundation, that was supplying midday meals to 175,000 children in a school in Hyderabad, we collaborated with them. GAIN worked with Britannia on product development, and we actually created what I think is a unique delivery platform for iron, built from the insight that 70% of school-going children are iron deficient anemic. And we created a biscuit which actually had iron in it. We worked with pediatricians to determine what should be the level of fortification. And before we went into the school, we do a baseline check of, let's say, the hemoglobin level of these kids. And just to give you an idea, typically these are kids who come to school and we expect them to be attentive and learn and so on, with an average hemoglobin of 8 to 8.5. The government has a big program called the IFA pill, the compliance rate of which is less than 12% or 10% because it tastes metallic, it makes you feel nauseous, and you have digestion problems. So all we did was we created biscuit as a wonderful carrier of iron, and there's 100% compliance and so on. And we did massive studies, and each study proved that if you give this consistently over a period of 90 to 100 days, that level of hemoglobin goes up to between 11.5 to 12. And this is work that we collaborated with AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Science. So it's not as though we were doing this. And with that insight, we took another big decision. We said that we will fortify even the products that we sell commercially. But those levels of fortification obviously have to be different. Sure. And there we went by the WHO code, etc., for fortification. So 50% of what Britannia even continues to sell now, which was the best insight, is fortified with vitamins and minerals. So I think the big idea that we stumbled upon there was, everybody keeps talking about corporate social responsibility and so on. My view on that is very simple. You can't do corporate social responsibility outside of your business. The best way to be socially responsible is to embed a social cause into the business model itself. Right. And that is, I think, what we did when we decided to fortify even the products that we sell commercially.
Very interesting. Vinita, rewinding the clock, one of the pieces I'm curious about is how much of who we are gets formed in our early years. So again, if you were to go back in time, are there 3-4 things that got baked in your, let's say, formative years, let's say till end of schooling or end of college, which still forms a core part of who you are?
I agree with your proposition of, we are a product of our experiences right from childhood to otherwise. As I think about it, I think the most significant part of thinking about things in multiple dimensions and not in a single dimension, or thinking about things systemically, I think comes from my exposure and my interest. I guess it was my exposure which led to my interest to a lot of things when one was growing up. So, in school, I used to do sports, I used to do dramatics, I used to, for a long time, I was a student of Indian classical dance, which I pursued in the evening outside of school. So I was interested in doing everything, you might say. Not that I thought about it, but I was also, the school selects a junior school captain and head girl and so on. So, I was thrust into those roles. And those roles, in a strange way, come with their own responsibility, which seems like a lot when you're a school kid. So I think it was a combination of all of that and my exposure to the world of theatre, to the world of classical music and dance, I think refined in many ways, my aesthetics or my thinking about things across a continuum, rather than, fragmenting that, this is school and this is extracurricular. In my life, everything morphed from one to another. The school finished and then we stayed back and then we did dramatics and then we played hockey and then, so I think in its own way, that was quite formative. That was quite formative in terms of looking at issues from multiple dimensions, in terms of creating a sensitivity and sensibility, which things like, the arts. And when I talk about arts, I talk about visual arts, I talk about performing arts, I talk about theatre. Right. I think those things enable you to touch something, right, which the rational, objective world of valuations and, NPVs and IRRs doesn't allow you to. Right. And I think both are important. I don't want to undermine one versus the other. But I think if we can create a greater sensitivity and sensibility and a respect for the bigger environment in which businesses operate, I think it would change things a lot and I think it would help a lot. I think we've become too unidimensional in our thinking.
The other piece I'm curious about, Vinita, also is from a parenting perspective. Was there anything about the parenting context which helped you come on this journey that you've come?
I think that's a very interesting question. As I think about it, ours was quite a happy household. And there weren't any challenges. It's, my parents were, for both of them, I think education, exposure was quite important. I think all the right brain stuff of, theatre and dance and poetry, etc., I got from my mother, who was, a prolific reader, very interested in these, these other dimensions of life. But as I think about it, it was a very secure childhood. And I think that security of childhood gives you confidence. It enables in you the creation of trusting relationships as compared with, kids growing up in households which are insecure, where dramatic things have happened. So, nothing of that drama happened in my life. It was, my dad worked for the government. We were encouraged to have a lot of, dinner time was always a time of debate, discussion, argument, and conversation. So it was that security, I think, which gives you the confidence and sort of the trust which stays with you later on in life.
This reminds me of a similar theme that came up when I was speaking with Vedika Bhandarkar in one of my earlier interviews. Vedika is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad and had a successful career in financial services leading up to heading Credit Suisse in India before moving to the social impact world and heading water.org in the country. When she reflected on her childhood, she made a related point about how she got into the habit of having open conversations with her family and how that helped her as she proceeded through her career.
As a family, we could talk about anything. And you could have very strong disagreements with your parents, and I had many of them. And no subject was taboo. And, we believed in open conversations. It was a little messy, sometimes a little loud, but that's the way we grew up. And that's also stayed with me through my working career, that whenever things have been uncomfortable or I've disagreed with them, I've had open conversations.
Tune into Nugget 15.02 for more insights around this. If you find this content purposeful, do share your review on iTunes and share it with people that you think could benefit from this. Now let's get back to the conversation with Vinita Bali. Moving forward, I happened to listen to another conversation of yours where you talk about having the dream of joining the IFS, spending a week in JNU, a week in D School, then getting into IIM Calcutta and Bajaj and choosing Bajaj, enrolling for a PhD in Michigan, then moving out in 2 years. I guess it's a longish period of time. But the reason I bring it up is, the people today, clearly we live in a world with a sea of options. And I've been through a lot of people go through it. There is that sort of flux of directionally, where do I go?
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about that phase of your life, how it panned out, but also with the wisdom of hindsight, any insights on how people should think about direction, given the sea of options in front of them?
Yeah. I certainly think if I were to think about the time that I was making those decisions and now, I think the choices have dramatically increased.
Right.
And therefore, the confusion about what am I interested in, what am I going to do, has also increased.
Right.
I also think that the environment in which we are operating is different. Today, I think it's much easier to go to do, to follow a certain career path and then move and do something different. I think those choices also enable a degree of fluidity, which was not available, certainly when I was making these decisions, which was late 70s, early 80s. So I do believe it's very important to be clear about what are you interested in, or what are the things that you're interested in. And not that I thought about it that clearly at that stage, but on reflection, I always ask myself 3 questions, which is that, is this something that I can learn from? The second is this something that I can add value to? Now that obviously is not in the context of your academic pursuit, but in a broader sense. And the third is, will I have fun doing this? And if the answer to all 3 is a yes, it actually makes it very easy. You talked about sort of my journey in terms of what I wanted to do. I was very clear that I loved to travel. I wanted to travel abroad. And in my mind, when I was a student, the Indian Foreign Service was the way to do this. So that is why I was, saying, okay, I'm going to join the IFS, then I get to travel and see the world. And the reason I went to JNU and D School was because I enrolled for a master's in economics. My undergrad was in eco honors from LSR in Delhi. And so I got admission in JNU, I got admission in D School. I really pity the children who are, who've done their CBSE exams. They've all got 98% and they're still not getting.
We have 100% cutoffs these days,
yes,
right?
They're still not getting into the colleges of their choice. I with about a 78% in my senior Cambridge had a choice of, any college I wanted to join in Delhi University. Right. And then after that, a D School, a JNU, IIM Cal. And, the only reason actually I decided to go to Bajaj had nothing to do with anything. A cousin of mine who lived in Bombay came down and said, well, why don't you come to Bombay? You've always studied in Delhi. It'll be great. And, if you want to sit for the exam, in any case, you have to do a master's, do an MBA, and then write the Foreign Services exam. And I thought it was a good idea. And it was as casual as that. And, that's actually been quite true of everything that I've done. It hasn't been that I'm very clear that this is what I want to do and I have pursued it. Things have actually fallen into my lap. And once they fall into my lap, then I very quickly decide what interests me and pursue that. So that's how I went to Bajaj. And, once you go there, I remember in February, the campus interviews started. And even though we were going to finish in June, I had jobs in February. And then, so IFS went out of the window.
And any reflections on the enrolling for a PhD but moving on in 2 years?
Yeah, so I was always interested in academics, actually. And somewhere harbored this thing of, maybe I need to become a professor. So what happened was I had worked, and I was clear that if I wanted to do a PhD, it was not going to be in India, it was going to be overseas. And I needed some work experience and so on. So that's how. So this is after about 2.5 years of working. I actually, again, that was also a very casual conversation. But to cut a long story short, I got this wonderful scholarship from the Rotary International, which paid for everything, including my air ticket from India to wherever I would have got admission for a year. And so I got that scholarship first. And then I said, okay, I need to write my GMAT, my TOEFL. I was late for everything. But anyway, I did all that. I was late, but I got into Michigan State University at East Lansing. Right. So I went off, and Cadbury were wonderful enough.
And this was a PhD in which topic?
So this was a PhD in management, and I was very clear I wanted to do competitive strategy. That was also the time, early 80s, where Michael Porter was, so there were all these books on the strategy of war and how it. Right. So that was an area of interest for me. But anyway, so I enrolled. I actually finished all my 45 credits in a year. I got myself transferred to Columbia to pursue my PhD. And then after about 1.5 years, I just got bored. I got bored because for me, business and management was about doing, not about studying about business and management. And I think Cadbury, my employer, when I went from India, I think they understood me better than I understood myself. And they gave me this wonderful offer. They said, okay, we give you 1 year to 1.5 years of study leave. If you do decide to pursue your PhD, you resign. Sure. And if you don't, you come back. And, there's no downside in an offer like that. So, so from that PhD, there was an internship in the UN. So I was kind of in this very experimental phase of my life. Right. So I went and worked in the UN for about 4 months. I was a graduate intern there and so on. But that also helped me clarify what I did not want and what I did want to come back to. And it was clear to me that, doing a PhD in economics would be different from doing a PhD in business. So, business is about being in the activity and in the, in the sort of, what should I say, the everyday decision making of the business world and not studying about it. So that's how I decided to drop a PhD. Cadbury then offered that I go and work with Cadbury's in the UK, which was actually my first time living and working abroad. And it was quite unusual. This was 1984. Unlike now when multinationals have opened up, not many people, especially in marketing and sales, went and worked overseas. So it was quite a thing. I loved it. I was in the UK. I launched the first ever aerated chocolate, and that exposure was just wonderful.
But just again, maybe sticking to that choice of direction, if you had to distill, just given the journeys you've been on and the journeys you see, how should a youngster who's sort of at the cusp of 12th or at the cusp of a undergrad degree think about direction, whether it's a PhD or business or arts or, any guiding frameworks worth reflecting on?
I think one thing is that you must think about what you like to do. In my case, my choices were for an undergrad degree. I could have done history, I could have done English, and I did economics. Part of it also was guided by conversations I had with my parents, with my dad. Could I have done history or English? Yes. But it would have been a different trajectory after that. And I think what is more important than the choice, I think what is more important in choices is, if you realize that you're doing something which you truly don't enjoy, don't live with it. I think, and especially today, there are so many choices. There are wonderful careers in journalism, in hotel management, in, so many other things. So I think the worst thing anybody can do to themselves is to pursue something which inherently you don't like and you don't enjoy. That is a very clear-cut reason to, go back and think about what you want to do and what you enjoy doing.
And even when I reflect on your choices, while you suggested that there was sort of happenstance in a few situations, clearly you took quick calls based on how you were feeling in that journey and made and sort of
and I think that's important. I also think there's another thing, Deepak, which is in everything that I have seen, I think your own attitude makes a lot of difference. Aptitude is one thing. Aptitude determines how well you do anything that you do. But I think attitude is also very important. If you come from a mindset of cribbing about everything, then nothing will ever stack up to your expectations. If on the other hand you say, I'm curious about this. This is feeling right for me. I'm enjoying studying this or doing this. And you put yourself completely into it, or you immerse yourself. I think there is that great joy in discovery, that there is that great joy in that curiosity. And if you don't like to learn, then you should never be a student anyway. But I think if you discover joy in learning, whether as a student or as a professional or as a chief executive or as in any role that you play, then it all becomes very easy. I think if you come from the orientation of, oh my God, my parents want me to do a degree and I have to get this, check this box and move on. And I see people in organizations come with the same attitude. It's a job that I have to do. It's not a job that you have to do. Being a student, being a professional, working doesn't define your life, but is a very important part of your life.
And I'm sure these two types of people show up very differently at work. The types who are doing it because they want to learn and they are passionate about something versus people who are doing because it's a job. I'm sure you see that difference.
Yeah, and I think it all boils down to authenticity. It's about, you have to be very comfortable with who you are.
And if you could double click on the word, what does that word mean for you, Vinita?
Authenticity?
Yes.
Authenticity to me means, integrity of purpose and integrity of action. It is about recognizing, who you are and, and in a sense that determines your behavior. So I think that consistency of behavior, if I am projecting myself to be different from who I am, then it's very hard. Whereas, authenticity is you see me as it is in black and white, warts and all,
Got it.
you know that this is the person.
Got it.
And I think authenticity also enables people to actually see your intent. You are then not playing games either with yourself or with anybody else. There is a certain genuineness, there is a certain honesty, there is a certain, this is who I am.
Right.
And I've just found that to be so much simpler to deal with than sort of the complexity that gets created when, when there are hidden agendas, when, what you're saying is different from actually what you're thinking, and so on. So,
and it's interesting you say this. I was talking to another gentleman, Abhijit Bhaduri, who's written a book called Digital Tsunami. And the point he made was, especially in a world where different versions of you are out there in the digital world, the bar has gotten much higher for you to be authentic, because it's so easy to be caught out if your projection is not in line with who you are. And there's just so many more channels of you floating around in the world we live in. So it was interesting that he made a point in that context of the digital, the world we live in.
Yeah. I think, Deepak, what we are saying is that if your deep down values and beliefs drive your behavior, then the chances when you're operating from a point of authenticity is that even in different contexts, there is a certain behavior that can be expected from you. And I think that's what we're talking about. You talked earlier, we referred to leadership. To me, leadership is a verb. Is not a noun. And I think everybody is a leader in different contexts and in different situations.
Right.
But, leadership is not a position. It is a behavior.
And just moving on from your early educational experiences, Vinita, you spent a large chunk of your time in the consumer goods world. And once again, if I adopt the lens of an individual coming from a B school and was looking at different options, consulting, financial services, consumer goods, what's your advice on how people should think about a career in the consumer goods world? What sort of, in your experience, what sort of people have flourished and what sort of people haven't? And what questions should students ask themselves before they sort of march forward in that direction? Any insights there?
Yeah. I would say, in a sense, as I think about it, it's almost like saying I didn't choose the consumer goods world. The FMCG world chose me. Primarily because, the first job I got was in an FMCG company, and then it kind of moved from there. I think, again, I go back to the point of you have to intrinsically like what you do. You have to intrinsically, especially if you're initially starting off in marketing and so on and so forth, you have to be able to relate to the product, because you have to be able to relate to the consumers and so on and so forth. And I don't think it is so much about the consumer world as it is about the orientation that you bring to what you do. So whether I'm selling a computer or a chocolate, it is important for me to understand, who my customers are, what my channels are, who my consumers are, how does my product fit into their life, not how their life fits into my product. Typically we tend to see the world from the lens of the company that we are operating in. And I think the biggest challenge is to see the world from the lens of the world. Right. And that's why I said it's not how your life fits into my product, but how my product fits into your life. Right. So I think the interesting part about marketing is this whole, it's not deterministic. There's nothing which says if I do this, every consumer will do that. So what is interesting to me about marketing is the psychology of consumers, right, the sociology of the ecosystem in which business happens. One of the characteristics, as I keep saying, of the FMCG businesses, that we rely a lot on velocity. We are talking about low unit price products, which a lot of people have to buy a lot of times for the business to be successful. So in a sense, you're up for choice all the time. And I think that's what is interesting. You're dealing with large numbers of consumers. You're dealing with things that they use every day. It's not a product that you use, unlike pharmaceuticals. I'll think about a drug when I'm not well. These are happy products, chocolate, soft drinks, biscuits. And these are little joys. These are not serious things. They don't change your life. Right. But these are simple joys. And what is very interesting is when you start looking at the value chains of each of these organizations and the number of jobs or the employment that they create is another very, very fascinating aspect. And I realized this as I, grew in experience and I guess grew in the roles, that you really have an ability to impact the livelihoods. I'm not arrogant enough to say the lives, but you have the opportunity to impact the livelihood of so many people in that value chain. The little kiosk that is sitting on the road, selling biscuits or soft drinks. And these products are like having cash. If you're sitting on the roads with a crate of Coke, by the end of the day, you're going to be able to convert your product into cash. Right. So it is the much larger ecosystem. And then you realize how much more value you can add to that ecosystem by the way you deal with that ecosystem. How do you take in India? How do you deal with your contract manufacturers? How do you deal with contract labor? And how authentic are you as a company in dealing with all of those? Are you cutting corners or not? There are so many opportunities for, creating employment, jobs. And when you look at business in that context, and when you look at how much influence business has on impacting livelihoods, and when you really think deeply about that, that's the entire ecosystem you're managing.
Got it. And from let's say, from the lens of somebody trying to make a directional choice, any words of advice on what question should I ask myself to say, okay, the reason I say is people are often I was quite confused. I applied to consulting companies, banks and so on when I was graduating from IMA. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if there are one or two defining traits that stand out that people reflect upon for them to say, okay, maybe this might be interesting for me.
Yeah. The lens I would use is that, does this opportunity give me the chance to work with really smart people? I think the culture of organizations is very important. You have to have... One piece of advice I would give is that, if you increase your own self-awareness of who you are and what you like doing. There are some people who flourish in a competitive, adrenaline-flowing environment. Right. There are others who are more measured. And you have to actually do a little bit of homework to say, first of all, do I like the products that this company sells? Whether these are consumer products, white goods, services, anything. Can I relate to this? if I cannot relate to, alcohol, why would I go and work in Diageo? If I cannot relate to, let's say a tractor, why would I go and work in a company that is selling tractors? So there is something which says, can you relate to the product? What is the culture of this company? Do I have the opportunity to work with really, really smart people? I think those are considerations. We don't spend enough time looking at some of the softer aspects of culture and so on and so forth. And I do believe, and I'm going to be very explicit about that, it is not about money. If you're good at what you do, opportunities will chase you and money will definitely come. So don't start with, where am I getting the most salary? Start with, where will I become the most wonderful, manager, the most wonderful person? Where will I get the maximum opportunities? Because if you are good, there are opportunities. There will be more opportunities that you can imagine. And, the money comes.
Vinita, moving on, I'm curious about the topic of transitions. And clearly you've worked in multiple continents across several countries. And you moved from Cadbury's to Coca-Cola, which is a transition in cultures. And even within Coke, you made big functional transitions, right? Marketing at Latin America to heading corporate strategy, and then Coke to Zyman Group, and then Britannia. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time on some of these transitions. And the one piece I'm curious about is the first 90 to 180 days, where often the hairline cracks become fractures very quickly if not addressed properly. So give us a sense of what are the omissions and commissions in these first 90 days, both 90 to 180 days, both from a incoming leader's perspective, but also from a hiring leader's perspective. What can the two do to ensure that the transition goes well?
So there are many questions in this one question. So let me try and segregate them. The first is the transitions you make. I think in my case, every transition was about, in my evaluation at that time, looking to a different and a better not in terms of money, but actually I think the word really would be looking to a different and a more diversified opportunity. Mm-hmm. Except the last one, which is when I moved back after 18 years to India to work for Britannia. That was purely a personal choice and a decision. My mother had had a stroke, and I just decided that this was the time to be close to my parents. So that was very largely driven by a personal choice and by a career that, by a company that would not require too much of overseas travel, etc., because I was moving back primarily to be with my parents. So that was a very different, and it came at a very different life stage, both professionally as well as personally. Everything before that was about the opportunity for a diversified role, the opportunity for a bigger impact, the opportunity for a larger footprint, including the transitions I made to move from country to country. So with Cadbury's, for example, I had an opportunity to work in the UK, which for the first time in my life was going and working overseas in a very, very developed, it was the number one market for confectionery for Cadbury's in a very developed market. So huge learning opportunity. Then to go and work in Nigeria, which was really part of a leadership trajectory that I was on in Cadbury's, where a bunch of us had been selected to do different roles. And I was actually supposed to come back to India as CEO of Cadbury's in 1993 when I finished my Nigeria assignment, which went off very successfully. At that point in time, Cadbury gave me a choice. They said, of course, you can come back to India, which was part of this whole leadership program we were on. We were connected with INSEAD and so on. I think there were about 10 or 12 of us globally. And so they came back to me and said, well, there's an opportunity to go to South Africa. And the first question I asked them was, how do I fit? I'm neither black nor white. And they said, that's exactly why you fit. And they gave me an offer. I must say Cadbury approached things in a very non-linear fashion. They said, go and spend 10 days in South Africa on our expense, travel around the country, meet with the Cadbury people, and then you decide. And I came back very, very clear that South Africa is what I wanted to do. And so it was going as marketing and sales director on the board of Cadbury South Africa, not as CEO. But one of the other things I want to say is titles have never been important to me. I wasn't craving a CEO title. For me, it was the adventure. For me, it was the opportunity to really create a line in the sand at a time of one of the country's most profound transitions in South Africa. Mr. Mandela was released in 1990. The country was having its dialogue between the National Party and the ANC. Elections were going to happen in 1994. A number of countries that had continued to operate in South Africa were operating in a very limited market. There was this huge opportunity of how do we connect with the new South Africa. And this was a marketing person's dream for me. I would never, chase a title. I would always chase. So I do think I've also operated from a sense of adventure, from a sense of possibilities, from a sense of horizons, not from a sense of, something which is definitive and deterministic.
The reason this is interesting because in large MNCs, again, when I look back, when I was a search consultant at Egon Zehnder, I would find that a lot of people who've had good careers in MNCs often find repatriation quite challenging because you fly and you go to different places. At some point when you want to come back and land in the home territory, it gets much harder. So did you think about that, the sort of coming back to base at some point, or you'd set off and...
No, as I said, I had no plans to come back to India. Right. I was flying. I was doing what I wanted to do. I was having a great time. Right. And therefore, my decision to come back to India was not a professional decision. It was a personal decision. And at that point in time, that personal decision was very important for me.
And on just persisting with this theme of navigating a large MNC, any themes on... so one is a sense of adventure, and clearly one is a sense of delivering on the mandates you're given. But are there other themes around how you manage a career in a large corporate without getting lost?
Yes. In fact, when I joined the Coca-Cola company from Cadbury's, was the first time I got into a global role. And it was a very large global role. Because it was the global marketing director for brand Coke, which operated in 200 countries at that time. This is Atlanta. And, this was also, Atlanta was really creating this whole global structure for managing global brands. It had some sort of a loose structure before that, but, they had got back Sergio Zeman as the chief marketing officer. Coke was flying high in 1994 when I joined Coke. I mean, Coke was flying. Those were the days when, people like Roberto Gozueta, who's the chairman of Coke, was on the cover of Fortune talking about economic value added and, how do you serve the customers and the market. And and for me, again, I was doing very well in Cadbury's. Why did I move to Coke? It wasn't that I left Cadbury's. It was that I moved for a marketer, what could be better than the opportunity to be responsible for the world's most valuable brand? And, I could not say no. And one of the things I really credit Cadbury with, and I had this conversation with Dominic Cadbury, who said, is there anything we can do to hold you back? I said, I'm not running away. I'm just running to something else. And, so culturally, the two were very different. Cadbury's was very, British very Quaker, and there was the Coca-Cola company. I got into a very amorphous role.
Right.
We were creating, global sort of architectures and so on. And, for the first 4 to 6 months, I was just trying to get a handle on, so what exactly is my role? And there were several of us who had, joined at the same time. There was a new global brand director for Fanta, for Sprite, so we used to go off at lunch and talk and say, so what are we doing? But I think what happens is if you're okay with ambiguity, and there is some degree of complexity, and if you are aware of, what is happening around you, because at the end of the day, success in any role is a function of empathetically understanding what the role is, where the role can truly add value, and, how do you create processes and structures so that things which are multidimensional remain multidimensional. Then I think you get a big dose of success.
I'm curious about the phrase you used, empathetically understanding. Say more. What do you mean by empathetically understanding the role?
So in this case, it was, take a brand like Coke. Mm-hmm. It's very local in its distribution and sales. Mm-hmm. It's not, unlike a few brands where you've got, 3 global factories that are supplying the world. Mm-hmm. In a case like Coke, you've got, tens, if not hundreds of bottlers and distributors in every country. So the delivery is as local can be. Mm-hmm. But here we are talking about the brand, what it stands for, how it is to be communicated, as global can be. So it is the red can, it is the dynamic ribbon, it is the properties that Coke associates with, how do you activate the Olympics. So the decision to sponsor the Olympics is a global decision. Right. The architecture for how that is going to be created is what we developed globally. But the challenge was that it had to be executed locally. Now you're coming into a situation where people have been used to operating in a certain way. So if you understand, what are the pain points, or where countries are looking for augmentation, then it becomes so much easier, to create that pull rather than a push. Part of that push comes from saying, okay, in Coke, we created very simple frameworks, and that's what I liked initially. We said it's not about global or local. It is global and local. We simply need to define what is global and what is local. We simplified things, and that's what I liked. Part of my initial role was, it was almost like you're bringing in a little bit of academic rigor into the thinking. We created the whole architecture for Coca-Cola. What are the properties we are going to associate with and what we are not. We were associating with everything. The joke used to be that if it moves, sponsor it. If it doesn't, paint it red. And we said, how do we change this to becoming more strategic about what we want to do? We created frameworks and architectures for how do we connect with the Olympics. So if India wants to activate cricket, how does Coke associate with cricket? So it was a very simple framework which said there are ideally 4 levels of decision making. Level 1 is it's a global decision with no input from the countries. Level 2 is global decision with country input. Level 4 is country decision with no input from global.
Centralized to decentralized.
Yes. And we said, a country decision with input from global. And level 3, which is where we didn't want to be, is our decision. So we said it should be 1, 2, 4 and 5. So we created a lot of these wonderful frameworks, etc.
And just sticking to the theme of transitions, Vinita, if you had to write a playbook and talk about the missed opportunities, let's say when leaders transition at senior roles in large corporations like Cadbury or Coke, Are there one or two key things you would really highlight, both from a leader that's transitioning from and from a hiring leader's perspective? Just the stuff that they should focus on for the first 90 to 180 days?
I think in many ways, Deepak, the success of a new hire is more dependent on what the hiring leader does to create the context and the environment for the new person coming into the organization. And I believe that, when we spend so much of time interviewing talent and getting people in, it again surprises me why companies don't spend the same amount of rigor and robustness in terms of saying what would be the best way to absorb or to embed or enmesh these people into the organization. So I think there's almost a greater responsibility on the hiring leader to ensure that, the ground is fertile for the new person that you've hired to deliver his or her best. And I think some of the things that are very helpful are just very simple things like, the detail with which an induction is done. Making it easier for the new person to actually socialize within the organization. And these are not just formal things, but also informal ways in which you do that. I think usually it is also acceptance by the peer group and what the hiring leader can do in terms of, making the receptivity greater within the peer group. So I think the hiring leaders have a greater responsibility. As the person who has joined an organization, I think if you spend the first few days curious, listening, not jumping to conclusions, we tend to get very judgmental very quickly. I think if you spend the first few days as a tourist in a place, which is really about, as a tourist, you're exploring. You're curious. You want to read about this, that, and the other. So if you spend those first few days more like a tourist, more from the point of view of understanding and not judging, more from a curiosity orientation rather than I have the answers. And more from the point of view of really knowing that you are the new kid on the block. Right. Your hiring manager may have hired you, but none of the others, owe you anything. I think if you find that level of acceptance, and I learned it when I went to new countries. I mean, what did I know about consumers in Nigeria? What did I know about consumers in South Africa? And you have to very quickly go and figure out what that model of collaboration or cooperation is going to be. And I think if there is that attention paid, including to some of the softer things. This is not a task-oriented framework.
Right. And talking about the hiring leaders, one of the points you mentioned was ensuring that there's greater acceptance with the peers. Tactically speaking, any one or two things hiring leaders could do to ensure that, because that's often the point where resistance comes in, sometimes visible or invisible manner. So any tactical things you've seen people do to increase that acceptance?
I think one of the easiest things to do is to do things informally. Just do a lunch or dinner outside the office, where people first get to know each other as people before they get to know each other as positions within a hierarchy. And somehow in India, we're also very hierarchical. So I would do, an informal dinner with, the spouse or girlfriend or whoever or nobody, as the case might be. Because I think if you first understand the person and you first accept the person, then accepting the role also becomes easier. I think other things which are more like, the whole process of sort of socialization, making it easy for, not necessarily presentations to be made, but a walkthrough, giving enough one-on-one time with the new person and the existing people, not just in the office, but, go and have a cup of tea together or whatever. Doing some informal fireside chats. If the new person has to get to know you, if you get to know the new person also informally, that helps. I would call a bunch of 10 or 20 people and say, okay, here's our new head of supply chain. Ask him any questions, him or her any questions, and so on. So I think the more softer things, and again, it is very sort of cultural.
And it's interesting. It's almost work aside, let the web of relationships get formed, and then once that's firmly in place. I mean, it grows over time, but that sometimes gets built more effectively outside the work context.
And one thing I've also found is if you create relationships which are based on respect, then even when I don't agree with you, I still respect your point of view. And one of my key learnings is that we don't spend enough time on relationships, on professional relationships that are created out of, mutual respect. And therefore people feel that they are in positions and have to defend those positions. And that is where you end up not having a dialogue, but a discussion or even an argument where the end point is who is going to win, not are we going to come up with a better decision
for the company.
For the company, exactly. So this is not about, the finance guys winning over the marketing guys. It is about how the marketing and finance people are collaborating and engaged in a dialogue to come up with the best possible solution on pricing or revenue management or whatever the topic might be.
And just picking on another transition point, Vinita, which is when you move from a functional role to a general management role or a P&L role, did it happen for the first time when you joined Britannia, or had you
No.
a P&L
I was
earlier?
in a P&L role in Coke. I was division president for Latin America.
Got it. Wow.
For the Andean division in Latin America. So I'd been in a P&L role before. And actually, interestingly, in Cadbury's, in many ways, whilst it wasn't the full P&L, but as head of sales and marketing, the brand P&L was your P&L.
But I guess where I was going with this was I've noticed that often when you're in a function, you're often the master of your domain, and there's a certain style of leadership that works. But often when you're leading people who often know much more than you in their respective domains, the style needs to shift. So any reflections on how people can transition from, let's say, a functional leadership role to a general management role, and what are the issues that sometimes people don't reflect on enough that could derail at that transition point? Any thoughts there?
I think that is the most significant transition. There are other transitions which also happen in a functional role.
Right.
Let's say a transition from a brand manager to head of marketing. Right. Where you feel, oh my God, my brand manager hasn't written a good enough brief for the agency and I could write it in 5 minutes.
Right.
And you have to resist that temptation of
expertise still.
I could write it in 5 minutes.
Right.
So there is, even in a functional transition, there is an interesting thing. But functional to general management, I think is a big transition where really what you have to say to yourself is, my role is one of, there you really move in a significant way to what I call moving away from functional leadership to adaptive leadership, where your functional domain and expertise is less important than your leadership ability. Right. And that leadership ability really has to do with your ability to get people to collaborate, your ability for future thinking, your ability to envision, your ability to sell ideas to your team, your ability to inspire people. Right. It has nothing to do with anything because, am I from marketing going to become the best head of manufacturing? I can't. Am I going to become the best CFO? I can't. But if I can create a context for teamwork, alignment, inspired leadership, getting the best out of people. That is where your domain shifts from functionality to really inspiring people and getting the best out of them. It also shifts from, I think, again, something which we don't spend enough time on is what I call building capability, which to my mind is 4 or 5 things. It's about firstly ensuring you've got the right people in the right roles. Right. The second thing is it's about ensuring that you've got the right processes, to get the job done. It's about management cadence, which I call what are the structures that you have. It's not the structure of who reports to whom, but what are the structures in the organization? Where are the informal meetings happening? Where are the formal meetings happening? It is a question of what are the metrics you prioritize, which determine behavior. Right. And it is about, I think the biggest role you play in a general management role is what is the environment and culture you're creating. And I think that, to my mind, that environment and culture piece, the values, the authenticity, how you relate with people, how you relate with customers, how you deal with vendors. I think those are the roles of a general manager.
Just pausing there, even the Coke to India transition was sort of, one is clearly a geographical transition, but the other is also the organizational context.
Oh, it was huge. I was coming back to India after 18 years.
Correct. So both from a geography setting, getting used to India, the country, but also the company context. In the context of leaders who are transitioning back, again, there's a question I asked Ravi Venkatesan, who moved with Cummins in the US to Cummins in India. Any reflections on, again, what are the few things, what are the watch outs for leaders coming in at senior levels, and what are the typical missed opportunities in these transitions?
I think, first of all, people who are successful in moving geographies and countries and so on are necessarily people who are more flexible and adaptable. You have to be very flexible and adaptable. It's not, the world doesn't fit into you. You have to figure out how you fit into the world that is, and then determine how you're going to change that world, So you have to accept the current reality of what you're moving into. And that requires a degree of, again, sensitivity, empathy, because it's very easy for, the recipient organization or culture to completely reject you. So the first thing is to very quickly get a sense of how this place works. Very quickly get a sense of people and say, okay, who are the ones who will be on my team and play the transformation game? Who are the ones who will feel very challenged and therefore get very defensive? Right. You have to make some quick calls on people who are going to stay and people who are not going to stay. And sometimes you can make wrong calls, but you don't have the time.
And back to your earlier point about sort of being the tourist and being in the listening mode versus quick early decisions. Any thoughts on how that trade-off works of decisiveness versus being in the tourist mode?
You have to balance that because you almost can't do things on the fly and you almost can't take too much time to do it. But what I found in all my transitions was when you focus the organization not on themselves internally, but externally, on the market, on the consumer, on the competitiveness. And those are all hard fact-driven things. Everybody wants to be part of a winning team. And you are not there to critique and criticize what they have done. You are there to say, do you like the way we are winning now? Or do you want to win more?
Very interesting.
Do you like all the things that we have done now, or do we need to do things differently? And frankly, what I have found was I did many town halls, many meetings. And, I've always approached this from the point of saying that I don't have the answer. Neither does any one of you. But all of us together have the answers. So first of all, just to get people to engage in an open dialogue, I found was very difficult in India because people were taking positions, people were watching what their boss was saying, and so on. So you have to, that is where again authenticity plays a big role. So a couple of things if I could summarize. One is that you have to focus the organization externally, not internally. Secondly, my insight very clearly is everybody wants to be part of a winning team. And people will choose to play in a winning team. Some people are simply waiting there, staying there waiting for direction. So you have to determine who are the people who need to be very directed, and then they can go and do it. There are others. I found, for example, that, if my style is that you can't be directive. It has to be a combination of where you need to be directive. There are some things which are non-negotiable, and there are others which have to come from the team members themselves. They have to own decisions. Yeah. I found, certainly in the, that a lot of people were waiting to be told. People like to believe that they're decision makers, but actually they're waiting to be told. And they're much simpler saying, okay, I was told to do this and therefore I did it. And my thing is, at a certain level, you've got to take responsibility. And that responsibility comes from your ability to make decisions as well as implement. So you've got to size up a lot of things. But if you focus them externally, then the internal quibbling to a large extent comes down. I don't want to simplify it so much by saying that it goes away. There are still people who are waiting and watching. You have to then be able to determine, who are the people who are standing sort of on the edge. They can tilt this way or that way. You have to very quickly identify who are the people who are definitely, not going to be able to do this. And you have to have the right conversations with them. And then you've got, every organization has people, who are drivers of change. So you've got to identify those 10 or 12 with a missionary zeal to change.
If this is a topic of interest, you might want to tune into the conversation with Ravi Venkatesan, where he talks about some of his transitions. Cummins overseas to Cummins in India, heading Cummins in India to heading Microsoft, and so on. He talks about decoding the rite of passage in a new company.
So it's important that the promoters like you.
Yeah.
And the rite of passage in Microsoft was you needed to take on Bill and Steve. And it didn't matter whether you won or lost the argument, but the courage to stand up and hold your ground was a rite of passage.
In our chat, he also spoke about some of the other transitions, including coming back to India from the US, moving from executive to non-executive, and moving to the social sector, and so on. This is Conversation 6 at the Play to Potential podcast. If you find this content purposeful, do take a moment and leave a review on iTunes or share it with people that you think would benefit. Now, back to my conversation with Vinita Bali. And back to the role of the hiring leader, in this case the promoter. Any, again, reflections on their role in setting an incoming leader for success who's coming from a very different context?
When I joined Britannia, it was still a JV between Danone and the Wadia Group.
Okay.
So I was really coming into a JV, and there were several Danone people on the board. And so on. I had been interviewed by the Danone people.
Understood.
And actually, in many ways, Britannia was quite a professional company. And, one of the first things I said is that, I work best. And that's another thing that you must know. You must know how you work. And, my thing was I work best when I'm given responsibility and accountability. I will not surprise you,
right.
But I cannot work with somebody standing on my head all the time. So we agree on deliverables, and if I deliver, great, and if I don't...
Back to the point about cadence, right? It works upwards as well.
Exactly.
Right? It's to establish that cadence in...
You have to. Yeah. You have to.
Right.
And it worked exceedingly well.
Right.
It worked exceedingly well. And I think most often, people are not honest enough to say what they feel. And I really feel that we do ourselves a disservice when we are not honest enough in positions of responsibility and accountability, because everybody is receptive.
Right. And moving on, Vinita, you sit on multiple boards. I'm curious about the transition for successful executives into boards. Again, your wisdom, and I'm curious about two things. One is you're on a few Indian boards, boards of Indian companies rather, CRISIL, Titan, Kasturi and Sons, and some global boards. In your experience, what do you see as the difference between great board members and good board members, both in terms of what they bring to the table, but also how they prepare, how they engage, and so on? And secondly, a related question is, for these successful executives, what are the watch-outs in terms of stuff they need to learn and unlearn as they transition to being a board member? Any reflections on that?
Yeah, in my case, I was fortunate enough to be on several boards, even in my full-time executive role in Britannia.
Right.
What I have done since then is actually I took up 2 global boards. Primarily because what I was missing when I got back here was that huge global perspective I had in my roles at the Coca-Cola company. Right. And the 2 global boards that I joined were in very different domains. One was an agri-products company, a Swiss board, and the other is a medical devices company based, a FTSE 100 company based out of the UK. And these were domains. So for me, boards serve the purpose of a continuous learning and development plan. Right. As a non-exec. You're learning about different domains, how they look at opportunities and businesses and so on. So certainly for me, global boards are critical and important because I do like a global perspective. In fact, I got off a lot of Indian boards and I wanted to restrict them really, because there are only so many boards you can do if you want to be, a productive board member. Right. So, again, I joined the board of CRISIL, which is very much an analytical company. It does a bunch of different things. Ratings is only part of their business. It has, again, an ability to interact with executives from S&P and McGraw-Hill who are on the board. So, in my case, I have chosen boards that will expand my horizon. Right. Both from a domain perspective as well as from a geographic perspective. I do see a very big difference between the quality of conversation, in my experience, on boards in India and the global boards that I have been on in general, and I'm generalizing a lot. I think the contribution of board members is in a way more significant on global boards than on Indian boards. I think people come better prepared to board meetings. The board meetings are run more effectively and more efficiently. The quality of material that is distributed in advance is oftentimes better. The discussions themselves are discussions. There is less presentation and more discussion. I find on the Indian boards, there's a lot more presentation, and as Indians, we also tend to be more verbose and so on. There is a lot more engagement in between board meetings on the global boards than there is on Indian boards. On Indian boards, you typically get together for the quarterly meetings and one strategy meeting, and that's it.
And that's engagement as a group, or is it bilateral, or is it?
No, there are formal calls that we do. So every, 4 to 6 weeks, you're on a board call. So you are, in a way, more regularly connected with the board and the business of the company. And these are not chit-chat meetings. I mean, these are significant meetings. And these are done very well, using technology. So there are some differences. And, again, I think in India, it also depends on type of boards. The other thing is every global board that I've been on has been a professional search process. I think a lot of Indian boards are moving to that, but a lot of board members on Indian boards, if you look at the old boards, it's the chairman picking up the phone.
Circle of comfort, right?
Yeah, it's the chairman picking up the phone and speaking to somebody, or a few people in the group deciding who should come on to the board. Every global board I've been on, I have been one amongst several candidates who have been interviewed by the board. So you know that you're there because of your competency. And it's very interesting, you look at Indian boards and you look at the number of people who are almost like, the team that goes from one board to the next. And I think that also partly comes in the way of productive conversation.
So wrapping up, Vinita, thanks so much for your time and your insights. As you know, the two questions leaders, I believe, ask as they go through the journey is where to go and how to grow. And this podcast is titled Play to Potential. So it's about each one of us finding what we have potential for and playing the best we can. In summary, any headline thoughts you want to leave the listeners with to play to their potential?
I would say that playing to your potential comes from a few things. The first thing is you've got to have conviction. Conviction in what you're doing. And you have to be a consummate learner. So it's conviction about what you want to do. And the consummate learning has to do with who you are. So I do believe that, when you have conviction, then the drivers really are, a certain passion. Because you believe in something and you're convinced, you will find the best way of doing it. You have to believe that you don't have all the answers, but there is somebody out there who has the answers. You have to believe that realizing your potential is as much about what you do, and in an organizational sense, how you play with others. So it is not just an individual journey, it is also a collective journey. And I think the last thing really is to say that the only way to grow a company is to grow yourself. And the only way to grow yourself is to be curious about learning.
Lovely. Pleasure talking to you, Vinita. Thanks for being so generous with your time and insights.
Thank you. Great conversation.
The theme that struck me the most in this entire conversation was the notion of curiosity and the mindset of a tourist, and how this mindset has guided several of the decisions Vinita has made during her career. Whether it was taking the South Africa opportunity with Cadbury's instead of the seemingly attractive India country head role, or the way she chooses board positions today. I hope you found the conversation purposeful. Do take a moment and leave a review on iTunes and share it with people that you think could benefit from this. I look forward to having you at one of the subsequent conversations of the Play to Potential podcast. Bye now.